Hello and welcome to a new discussion. Um, Today I'm going to be talking about the Sun conjunct Saturn in the natal chart. Now, if you would like to consult astrologically regarding natal chart synthesis, then you can send an email to astrologer at the 5 principles of organized complexity.com. That's organized complexity as one word. The 5 principles of organized complexity as one word. You can go to my website at www.the5principlesoforganizedcomplexity.com. Now, organized is spelled with a Z, not an S. Or you can send a WhatsApp message to +41 76 798 6476. So, I just listened to an analysis somebody gave on YouTube for Sun conjunct Saturn, and this person talked about how the need for compulsive humility. That life, the summary of his analysis was that life, when you have Sun conjunct Saturn in your natal chart, life frequently and deliberately humbles you, because whenever you start to feel up there, or whenever your confidence starts to rise beyond a certain point, then a sequence of events in life are triggered that bring you back down to humble, make you eat a humble pie and all that. I was very dismayed by this, because it's one of the things. I don't really know much about Vedic astrology, but Vedic astrology seems to have these fatalistic conclusions regarding what astrology is supposed to be prescribing or describing, and that has always unsettled me. And the reason is because having such a fatalistic attitude towards these things simply implies that you have given power to these things. Astrology has no power beyond it's a language. Like, you could say English has a power, or English has some type of intrinsic power or meaning. It doesn't. They're just scribblings on a piece of paper. The meaning, you give it meaning, because that meaning is shared in a general context with all other English speakers. Astrology is just Western astrology is just like that. You have symbols that are used to describe a language, and then this language is strung together to convey patterns of meaning, but the meaning doesn't exist in the symbols. When you say the sun means this, it doesn't mean that the sun has any intrinsic property in its meaning. It doesn't have any power. It's the sun. It's these things don't have any powers on their own. The stars or whatever, they do not compel anything. They do not have any intrinsic substance by themselves. That's just meaningless and ridiculous. Okay, and that's why I say, look, for astrology, there's nothing really rational about it on the surface, and you would say that 99% of people who practice and work with astrology, they don't understand it rationally, because how could you? There are lots of places where you hand wave, where you basically make leaps of faith in assumptions because you don't know. For you to really understand astrology, you must be able to go beyond those gaps, those hand waving gaps, and you must be able to populate those places with rational explanations. And if you're going by the scientific method, then science does not acknowledge the relationship between astronomical bodies and human consciousness. For you to begin to see the link between all of that, you need to understand the principles of organized complexity, which is what my entire work so far has been based on. Now, I have a lot of podcasts where I go into what the principles of organized complexity are supposed to be, or are. I've written an entire book on that called The 5 Principles of Organized Complexity, wherein which I weave a thread between various aspects of human understanding, with the aim of showing that these aspects are but one aspect. That's you. Okay? So it doesn't matter what you're studying, whether it's chemistry, physics, biology, geography, geology, astronomy, cosmology, particle physics, microbiology. It doesn't really matter. The uniting factor for all of those pieces of wisdom is you. Okay? And that's the principles of organizing. That's where it starts from. Okay? Because we are the ones telling that story, and we're telling that story because we really want to understand ourselves. In our bid to understand ourselves, we outsource that process to a type of physical science where we try to understand the physical universe. But it's not the physical universe that we're really trying to understand. We're trying to understand what we are, who we are. And when I say who we are, I don't mean the identity we take on in life. You know, you could call your parents name you at some point in time in your life. And, you know, you have other assumed identities as you grow up. But that's not who you really are, speaking from the general context of what a human being really is. Okay? There's several podcasts which I have made where I talk about these in detail. But in this particular podcast, I'm going to bring attention to the Sun-Saturn conjunction. Now, astrologically speaking, the Sun is concerned with being the organizing principle, just like the Sun is the organizing principle for the solar system. And I once conveyed in one of my podcasts that when we look at the solar system today, we look at the Sun, you know, in the center of the solar system, acting as some type of gravitationally bound organizing principle for the entire solar system, right? Now, I said that when you look at the solar system, what you're really looking at is self-awareness, human self-awareness, but it looks like a solar system. And I'll definitely need to explain in detail what this means. Otherwise, you know, the meaning wouldn't really come cut across clearly. When we look at the solar system, we look at the Sun, a central figure called the Sun, and we see, these moving bodies in the heavens against the backdrop of the ecliptic plane, because that's where the solar system is. You can envisage it like some type of flat disk of some sort, with the Sun, somehow coordinating motion across that flat disk. But the Sun is also moving through another, relatively speaking, flat disk called the Milky Way galaxy. So, but we are concerned about the vantage point of humanity, giving meaning to all of these. So we are on the Earth, spinning on it, and then revolving around the Sun, all taking place within relative flat disks. That's a disk in a disk in a disk in a disk. Kind of reminds one of Ptolemy's epic cycles, basically, But that is the structure of human awareness. We see it as planets revolving around the Sun. But that's the way we understand it. That's the way we can perceive it. But what it really is it's really what I call it a convex structure of some type. And its real form is as an infinitely deep vortex. That's really what it is. But that's human awareness as it stands. You understand the full spectrum of human awareness. And so when that is as much information as I'm going to offer when it comes to making rational sense of astrology at this point. So I'm just going to jump right into the Sun-Saturn interpretation, which is in my podcast on Saturn, I describe it as limiting form. I describe it in contrast with the effects of the Jupiterian experience, which has to do with expansion. And according to Robert Hand in his book, Horoscope Symbols, he described the Jupiterian experience as reaching out into the universe to inculcate various aspects, wider aspects of experience into your own nature successfully. That is the Jupiterian experience. So it is perceived as some type of expansion, but it is the expansion of experience in a positive way, such that the things that you want and the things that you desire, you can bring them into your reality and into your experience. Now, it contrasts this with the Saturnian experience, which deals with limitations essentially, because the aim of Saturn is to create that hard experience. Now, the Saturnian experience, apart from just being what we perceive as a planet, it is that aspect of human experience that defines structure. So remember when I said that when you're looking at the solar system, you're really looking at the structure of self-consciousness. Well, the resolution of that statement lies in the fact that what you're looking at as a planet really is a very specific aspect of human consciousness with its own rules, the way that it behaves. It's literally, that's why you see it looks like a physical body. It looks like a planet with rings and all that. But you can debate from now till the cows come home if there's really a planet out there. You see? Now, in the beginning, personally, I don't think that there is reality, but reality is an extension of self-awareness. It is a projection of self-awareness. You understand? Because we have no idea if there's any such thing as a real reality. How would you perceive that? You have to be a self. And in this physical universe, you have to be a three-dimensional physical self before you can have the human experience. Okay, so whether meaning that whatever knowledge of reality that you can have is coming through what you are. What reality is outside of what we are as physical beings living in this three-dimensional universe, we have no idea what that can be. Don't even know how to think about that. But I've given several podcasts where I've made progress and able to describe what it is like being in a reality outside of space and time. Now, and so that's the Saturnian feeling. The experience of what we call the Saturnian effect, or the Saturnian experience within human being, is to bring concept into form, into physical form. Now, it's really, it's a physical form is really it's very elusive, because physicality doesn't really have any meaning. Physical forces and what we describe as physicality is more like it's literally frozen or motion that has been slowed down to the point where it is restricted in time and space. That's really what it is. It's like when you change steam to ice. All that's happening is the description, the atomic description or the molecular description is that the molecules involved in steam are moving way faster with greater degrees of freedom than the molecules that are in a cube of ice. The difference is motion. Okay? If it has more motion, then it has more thermal energy. It has more degrees of freedom. It can vibrate in different places almost unpredictably. But by the time you freeze that steam down into ice, then most of the degrees of freedom are lost. The molecules are locked into a type of lattice. A cubic, if you're talking about snow, then that's a hexagonal lattice. Okay, for instance, in the form of a snowflake. So all that has happened is that the molecular understanding is that the molecules have lost motion. And in this reality, motion translates to what we describe as energy, especially thermal energy. So the Saturnian experience is just like that. It reduces the degrees of freedom down to the most basic and most concise forms. I know a lot of people they don't think of the Saturnian experience this way, but that's really what it is. It's not. These are just these kind of explanations are beyond buzzwords. You have to really understand what the physical principle behind the Saturnian experience really is. It's about reducing the degrees of freedom, and it's not because it is intrinsically limited. No, it is to coalesce and condense it into what looks like physical form. So it gives materialization and manifestation to any concept. It doesn't just limit because it's meant to create hardship or whatever. You have a lot of things when people explain what the Saturnian experience is supposed to be. It just goes here and there. I guess it's based on the way that we, the narrative, the general narratives that are all out there in astrology. But it is very important to understand things from a first principle perspective. You really need to understand what the core phenomena is. Then you can understand its different manifestations and what the Saturnian experience conveys. And this is an aspect of human nature. It's not just something that's out there. It is a way of looking at certain aspects of human consciousness, whereby reality is reduced in a sense from having very many degrees of freedom in terms of directionality and purpose, and reducing that to a fixed set a very fixed type of movement, one that is less thermal in a sense, one that contains less motion. And the idea behind that is because that is the way everything physical around you, that's what's it. There's really no physicality beyond this regulation of the degrees of freedom of motion. So when you look at the table in front of you and the computer around you, or your phone or whatever device you're using to listen to this, the only reason why it is physical is because nature has created a reduction of the degrees of freedom to what we call energy. Energy, is here, there, and everywhere. It's, you have energy as radiation, for instance, okay? Where you have energy as something like, for instance, as electromagnetic radiation that has way more degrees of freedom than the energy contained in physical matter. That's why, that it is within that context that you can begin to understand the E equals mc squared that was put forward by Albert Einstein. Because in that view, energy is just condensed, matter is just condensed energy that is trapped in some type of now you can see the degree of reduction of freedom is c squared. That's the square of the speed of light. So that's how much restriction has been imposed on that energy to create matter, not generally mass per se. Okay, so that's just a very high level definition for why, but even for what most of what we consider to be physical matter is created by the electrostatic forces of charge, such that the reason why your hand cannot go through physical, that's the very sensation of physicality, is defined by electrostatic forces. Okay, it's all about electronic repulsion. That's the modern science definition of why your hand can't really go through a piece of matter. Why you feel physicality is that between the boundaries of so-called physical objects, there is structure, electronic structure, that repels, in a sense, such that the idea of physicality is born. I think it also has something to do with, this is something to do with the Pauli exclusion principle, whereby two fermions cannot occupy the exact same energy level. You see? So, but that's technical physics. But that is the Saturnian experience, because it is structure, it is form. And the reason for the reduction is to do what? To sharpen the nature of purpose in physical reality. That is the Saturnian experience. It brings things from the world of the Neptunian experience, which is defined as the opposite, really, which is essentially the nirvana in terms of nothing. It's the steam or beyond the steam, whatever, when you have water vapor and then you take that steam beyond the other phase of maybe plasma or something, but whatever it is, it has a very high level or a very high number for the degrees of freedom, meaning there is nothing that is certain in that world. Some people have attributed this behavior to quantum fluctuations, the behavior of the quantum foam, the uncertainty involved in it, the unpredictability of it, the extremely high degrees of freedom of it. When you contrast that to the degree of freedom of actual physical reality defined by the Saturnian experience. So, in summary, this experience, the Saturnian experience, what it does is it takes things from a very high level degree of freedom, motion, random noise, okay, something that looks like thermal equilibrium, okay, and it reduces it to physical form, structured like a structured lattice, the kind of lattice that you use to define material composition, not just at an atomic level, but at a molecular level. But it also doing, because remember, those things exist in awareness, in human experience. So it is also doing the same thing, and that's how you know that you are you. Being you means that what your brain is doing is it is reducing so much noise, so that you pay attention to the thing that is of focus, form, and structure. The Saturnian experience births physical things into physical reality. That's what it does. And it does that with your experience as a human being. So when you need to bring anything into physical existence, you need the Saturnian experience in order to bring it into physical existence and in order to sustain it on that level. Now, the Saturnian experience does this by resisting change. It does this by resisting change. And in human experience, what resisting change means that it refuses to evolve. It just stays static, dormant, unmalleable. It doesn't want to move. Which basically is an extension of what we described as the reduction in thermal energy. And so the Saturnian experience is described as cold, heavy. But it's the same thing being described. Doesn't matter if you could call it Saturn, but there's a reason why it is called Saturn. In Christianity, Saturn has been changed into Satan because they needed to give somebody a bad rep. They needed to create an entity to take the fall for the things that they couldn't understand about the general behavior of God. So, the way Saturn works in the natal chart is by delaying, especially when it is contacting a personal planet for personal energy, like like your Mercury, Venus, Moon, Mars, and slightly Jupiter, kind of energetic points in the natal chart. Whenever there's a contact there, in terms of like a conjunction, an opposition, a square, or one of the other aspects, then the role that Saturn plays is to compel that other energy to bring into existence its physical form. And it does this by denying the otherwise random emanation of that energy. And what I mean by random is in the sense that it makes the energy, that's, for instance, when I say the Venusian energy, for instance, it's not the planet Venus basically hanging out in space. I'm talking about the equivalence of planet Venus, the archetype of Venusian experience within your psychology. Because that's, it goes back to when you're looking at the solar system, what you're really looking at is just a structure of self-awareness, with the sun as the organizing principle. Okay. So Saturn does this by doing what? By delaying the experience of that energy which it contacts, pending the meeting of a particular requirement. Now that is the key. The key is there is a requirement imposed by the delineation of that Saturn in a natal chart. So its position, its placement, its aspects contain the essence of that requirement which it needs, and that requirement is the gatekeeper, and that is why Saturn is referred to as the gatekeeper or the lord of time. I mean, these things, you need to understand that when you delay something, it means that you're delaying it in its materialization in space and time. Saturn delays potential. That's what it does until a key requirement is met, and usually the key requirement is a particular flavor of practical reality, physical reality. Physical reality has its rules, because when everything is condensed, when energy is condensed into form, material things have a particular way they behave. And one of the key things about material things is inertia. That's one of the things Einstein first noticed. Is what Newton's laws of motion capture: inertia. Material bodies have inertia, meaning they remain in the state that they're in and they resist change. So a material body stays in the way that it is until a force is applied on it. It's one of the rules of materialism. And that's one of the principal conditions that Saturn brings into the natal chart. It requires and demands action. And as long as there's no action, it just stays there, delaying and dulling everything, making sure that this energy contacted cannot fulfill its potential or cannot blossom. When Saturn conjuncts the sun, then that particular requirement, that particular condition is imposed on the sun, the solar archetype within the personality. Now let's talk about the sun. What is the nature of the sun? Remember, the only description I have given so far is that within a natal chart, the sun is the organizing principle for that natal chart. What is organization? Organization means that everything has a spatiotemporal component. Organization is a coordinate system, is a frame of reference. That's really what it is. It is through organization that you know where and when you are. These are not the type of definitions you're going to get in any textbook or any book on astrology. These are from first principles. Organization simply means that there is a spatiotemporal continuum. Organization means that there is a framework or a frame of reference within which things happen. Organization literally is space-time. So within the natal chart, the sun acts as the coordinator, the controller in a sense of the context within which everything happens. Within human experience, because the external is that which is generated, connected directly to the internal, if you know how the two are connected. The sun acts as our center of our attention. When we refer to the self-awareness of humanity, that's exactly what we're talking about. The ability to focus. And there's a unique thing about the way that human beings focus compared to the way other animals focus. And it is really the quintessential definition of a human being. A human being's focus can be slowed down to the point where a step-by-step logical sequence of attention can be generated. That's really what it is. A human being can hold a sustained sequence of steps and procedures in the mind. It is, as a reflection of space-time. Because if there's a space, then there must be... how do we intuit the nature of space? Volume. Area. How do we intuit the nature of time? sequence, procedure, process, tick-tock. That's the solar impulse. So it is from there that it is from these things, the attention, the organization, it is from. But remember, every time you focus on one thing, it is usually to the exclusion of everything else. They do not disappear. They are still there. It's just that the amount of focus that is dedicated to them is diminished. So focusing attention is a selective process. It is a process that really, basically shares so much in common with the Saturnian influence. Most people don't realize that. They generally assume that the Sun and Saturn have such opposites in their nature, but it's not true. They're actually very complementary. And the reason why the dissonance or the discrepancy exists is because the Sun is also associated with some other type of another stage of the development of focus and attention, which is the sense of self, the growth of the sense of self. Because this happens when humankind evolved a brain or an equipment sufficiently complex enough to sustain an architecture capable of emanating self-awareness, then the object of sensorial experience turned towards the self. In the past, as early hominids, maybe somewhere on the savannah or wherever, like most animals or most primates, the sophistication in sensing the environment had to do with the flow of information coming through the material senses, and these were processed in such a way that each sense of self from the material senses was treated in almost isolation, and there was nothing to really regulate this. Each sensorial experience was drawn in its own direction. And this was necessary because, animals that live like that, they need to respond to their environment immediately. Now, what happened is, at some point in time, the sense of self became so sophisticated, but some other architectural changes in the brain also took place, which I'm not going to go into now, but they have to do with the thalamocortical projections and that began to occur in the human brain. This did something to the material senses in such a way that they were able to nullify, in a sense, just like noise cancellation headphones or something. They were able to nullify, in a sense, so as to bring themselves into equidistribution or balance, such that now they appeared a point within this sensation that was nullified. It was empty, and you cannot have a vacuum. That's really what it is. In experience, you cannot have a vacuum. Something else needed to fill the vacuum. And what filled it is the negation of those material senses, the exact opposite of the nullification effect. So the sense of I began to emerge as a rudimentary form of the nullification of these material, the impingement of these material senses. And in that gap, began to feel a sense of I. That is, the sense organs became so sophisticated they began to intuit a sense of self. And this sense of self, the original manifestation of this sense of self, right? I have given podcasts where I said that it was facilitated by the awareness of the sun, the one sun that we have in our solar system. And it's a long podcast, so you're probably going to have to listen to that. Okay? Now, this sense of self began to grow, because that's what it does. And we're becoming more and more self-aware. And as we become more self-aware, we become more understanding of the universe that we live in, because we're understanding ourselves more. This growth of the sense of self is something that is also ascribed to the quality of the solar influence in the personality. And that's why the sun is associated with the sign of Leo. So without going into the details too much, we can see that this sense of self is associated with a growing sense of self, which you can describe as what? Self-esteem or self-significance. And it is within this, it is because of this, that most astrologers will tell you of the incompatibility between the Sun and Saturn. Because if Saturn is anything, it is not the growth of self-significance in terms of how you would normally think about it. But when there is a conjunction, or even an opposition, or any major contact between the Sun and Saturn, then what is called into question is that sense of self-significance itself, which Saturn does what? Tries to bring into physical manifestation. And it does this by delaying it, pending the fact that, pending resolution through the meeting of a particular requirement. What is the requirement? The requirement always has to do with the physical manifestation of the solar impulse. That's exactly what it is. So when Saturn conjuncts the Sun, all right, it does not allow the Sun to express the growth of self-awareness or self-significance that the Sun usually signifies, and how this is expressed as some type of creative flair, because the Sun is an energy source when you think about it. So it delays this, it sits on this. And since the Sun, since that feeling of self, the growing of self, since it is very, very instrumental to the way that we organize our reality, it is virtually difficult to bring anything into physical realization when the Sun cannot express its sense of self-significance. And that basically accounts for how this YouTuber described the regular eating of a humble pie. You see what I mean? The serial failure that's, Saturn conjunct Sun seemingly defines. Because the Sun as the organizing principle for self-awareness, anything you want to bring into existence requires that Sun to be able to inspire the creative movement towards that realization. So any objective that needs to be fulfilled requires your Sun, because the central objective becomes the Sun, or a manifestation of the solar experience within your mind, within your personality. And when Saturn conjuncts this, it blocks that manifestation such that you cannot realize objectives. It doesn't really matter what you do, once you haven't understood the process. It's one of the best indications that reality is a projection engine. Reality is configured by a projection engine. For those who think that reality is just random or whatever gives. No, reality reconfigures itself to match the internal dynamics that is taking place at the deepest aspects of self-awareness. So the person with Sun conjunct Saturn has an uphill task, trying to understand what is really going on. They feel the surge, they cannot manifest it. And whenever they feel like things are, they are getting up on then something just reconfigures to bring them back down. That's because there's a requirement there. Now, what is the requirement? Because this is where I'm going to end this. What is the central requirement for the Sun-Saturn conjunction, or for the Saturn-Sun conjunction in the natal chart? Well, take what I've explained to you about what the Saturnian influence really is all about. It's about reducing the degrees of freedom such that something can become physical, like a physical object that has inertia. And you take the solar influence, like I've discussed it, as having the growth of self-significance, or the centrality of self, or the search for self-significance. When you merge these two together, it means that the constraint is that the requirement for Saturn is that the sense of self-significance must be made material and physical. You cannot assume it. You must create something that is hard physical truth that can be touched, that can be felt, no ambiguity about its existence. And because it's rather dull and heavy, it cannot easily be moved. It is that which now grows or affirms the sense of self-significance that the sun is looking for. This doesn't necessarily happen for all other, and remember, because Saturn is so reductive in its nature, it means that it is usually it usually revolves around one or two things. In the life of those with the Sun-Saturn conjunction or Saturn-Sun conjunction, the life task is often reduced to, at least from the perspective of the Sun, one major creative work. One thing. And that thing would have the element of Saturn and the Sun in it. And it must be hard, physical, practical. And to get the details, you have to look at the, where Capricorn is based, what house Capricorn rules, and you need to look at the house that Leo rules. But you also need to look at the 5th and the 10th houses. That synthesis. You need to be able to get the information from everywhere and then piece it together. Usually all the details are going to be contained within that. Because the idea is that Sun-Saturn conjunction is the realization of leadership in the real physical world. It's not whatever surrounds that leadership has only one criteria demanded of it. It must be real physical leadership. And the way Saturn impedes this is it makes the native so frightful of this inevitability, even though deep down inside them they know that this is inevitable. So this is why, in essence, beyond the ego control, they torpedo everything that will bring them to this awareness or to this realization, because they're afraid of it. They are afraid of their self-significance. Do you know why? Because it is very big. It means they have to lead physically and take responsibility for leadership, authority. People are going to look up to them. It's an inevitable destiny. They're going to have to make decisions that are going to affect the lives of people. They often flee from this because they see themselves as a mess. So how are they going to be responsible for other people? And that is the gift of the Sun-Saturn conjunction. If you have it within your natal chart, just know that your journey is not going to be easy initially until you have understood the central concept. Because what we're talking about is understanding what your root drives really are, your root motivations. Those things that are turning and becoming in your seat of conviction. They project your reality. And how Saturn did, because Saturn is basically, the Christians call him the accuser. They're not too far off, because he's not a being out there, he's you. He's the aspect of you that is necessary to survive here in the physical world. Without it, you couldn't be realized on this plane. So he literally delays everything. He just blocks everything and torments you. But he's torment you because that is what has been set for you as a consequence of your it's basically, how do you say this without sounding so okay, I'm gonna just go ahead and just, you have essentially set this up, right? Because what you have to do is very, very, very important. And when it's like when you know you don't have an alarm clock or whatever. Even the alarm clock is basically a representation of that. But if you request an early knock or an early wake, maybe in a hotel or something, right? You requested it because you probably have somewhere very important to be early in the day. And so where you have Saturn in your natal chart is where you have something really very important to do. And it is so strategic and so important that you have made sure that you need to catch hell in that area if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. So the alarm clock is here. Is it a negative thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it an evil thing? In a sense, it is not. In a real sense, it is what allows you to achieve the thing. Because what comes from the sun has this property about it. Since it is chiefly concerned with the getting in touch of self-significance, which is directly tied to the nature of creative self-expression. It's tied to sort of like identity. Then the expression of this identity culminates in joy. That's really that's the gift of that solar impulse. Joy. And when Saturn conjuncts the sun, it is virtually impossible to express yourself. Because the way you really want to express yourself, you can't because you're too afraid to start with. And that's come because reality has structured itself in such a way that various authority figures have always told you that you cannot express yourself, or they will basically deal with you, or they will punish you, or something like that. This is how Saturn materializes, and the aim of that is to, once you begin to accept that, the aim of that is so that you struggle against that, because before you struggle with it and overcome it, the result is shame and guilt and all the loneliness and restrictions, in terms of even finance, money, because it affects your sense of self, basically coordinates the way that your entire life is organized. Usually, the Saturn-Sun conjunction in the natal chart, most natives don't get to really understand what it's all about until they get past 40 years of age. And the reason is because they just give up at some point. It becomes too exhausting. Imagine they've been trying their whole life, fighting this internal battle without really knowing what it is. They may externalize the blockage and think that there are one or two people out there who are authority figures or thereabouts who are working against them. And this may be so. But the battle is not really the externalization, is just a reflection of what is going on much, much deeper inside. So the resolution that has been externalized, is you must accept what you are. The genuineness, the truth of what you are. Okay? It's not pride, it's not arrogance, it's nothing. It's just the way that you are, the way that God has made you to be. Now, who is above God? How do you question what you have been, how you have been made? You are here to carry authority and leadership and be responsible for a lot. That's just the way it is. Doesn't matter what anybody thinks about it. Your job is to be able to accept that, not by eating the false pie of humility. Humility for the sake of humility is false. And you just reset the entire game because you are being false to yourself. And Saturn is anything but false. We're talking about the hard reality, the way that reality is. It's not, you cannot impose that kind of falsehood on it. It wants that truth, the truth of being able to be just what you are. Okay? So there is a process, there are several decades of coming to terms of what you are once you have this Sun-Saturn in your natal chart. It's about coming to terms with, you don't have to accept authority. You don't have to, no, maybe that's not the way to put it. You don't have to, you are supposed to carry authority by virtue of your growth. By virtue of as you are. it's not really an authority that needs to be acknowledged per se by anybody. Nobody needs to confer that authority on you. The authority comes because you take responsibility. It naturally comes because of that. Because you put yourself in a position where you take responsibility, you have integrity, because you are seeking your self-significance. You are seeking your own self-expression. It's often childlike in a sense. Playful and all that. But any contact between the Sun and Saturn, play becomes a secondary expression. The real expression is very business-like. It's very, very serious in a sense, because Saturn is essentially the serious. It's about knowing that your life has a plan. There is a plan. Whether you choose to acknowledge it or not is not important. Now, if you do not acknowledge the plan, then the result is all the negative things associated with Saturn, because that is Jonah running away from the dictation of the Lord, being swallowed up in the belly of a whale, trapped in darkness in the belly of a whale for 3 days and 3 nights. That's basically, you cannot run away from yourself. It's one of the worst things that can ever happen to an individual, when you are broken from yourself. Okay, and that single thing is responsible for all sorts of things within the individual. See, if we see the solar, just to round up, if we see the solar system as an extension of, or what personality, human awareness, self-awareness really looks like, then what do we say about the Earth? Because we are on an Earth, and the Earth has been made in such a way that it is sort of very, very, very comfortable for human life, compared to once you leave the environment of the Earth. We see the Earth as, some people have even, if you think about it properly, you begin to intuit the Earth as a living, breathing system. Everything is so interlinked and so balanced and so stable, and so, even though lots of things happen on the Earth, you have volcanoes, you have earthquakes, you have, yet the entire Earth as a whole, as one integrated system, one organism, is beautiful, is amazing. Well, we are that Earth. That's really what it is. We are the Earth. When we think of ourselves, we don't normally think of ourselves as the Earth, because there's so many of us and we have different shades of color, we have skin color, that is, we have different mentalities in our head and all that. But the Earth is an extremely diverse place. There are about 300,000 species of beetle. We are the Earth. The state and condition of the Earth is what we are currently, because it's coming from us, isn't it? Anyway, that's the Sun-Saturn conjunction. I know it's probably not very different from how you've heard it before, but the idea is to, not just to add some, or to try to merge some buzzwords about the Sun and some buzzwords about Saturn, and then put it all together and start to look for meaning. The meaning has to come from a much deeper integration, because a conjunction, for instance, means that the identity of the Sun is now merged with the identity of Saturn. And to do that, you need to understand what is the core idea behind the Saturnian experience, and what is the core idea behind the solar experience. And these must resonate with, because truth is truth, and it connects with all truths everywhere. So the truth of the Saturnian and the solar experience must resonate with the truth of, in every other field of understanding that humans practice. It doesn't matter what it is, but they must all connect if they are true. If they don't, then something is very false somewhere.